Thank you for joining me, and I'm very excited to have this conversation because my favorite thing and before we get going, none of this is live, so I can take anything out and I'll do a proper intro and talk about the book and I'll do an outro and so on and so forth.
Okay.
But and I'm thrilled to have you and because one of my favorite things is when people name something that's actually quite obvious in the way that it operates in us, and yet it largely goes unspoken.
Mm,
And I feel like that is what this book is. And this idea of churn, I had
hmm
been sort of chalking it up to escalating neuroticism, anxiety, feelings in
hmm
this. I don't even know what we call this moment, this sort of post DEI world where we're going in the opposite direction.
hmm
But that it was like we were operating with an anxiety that was intolerable, and now people have every reason to retreat, and that's the opposite of what we need to do. So thank you. I feel like this is
Yeah.
such a helpful frame for having
hmm
these conversations about how we move forward. So
Yeah, I hope
with
so.
yeah, so can you sort of, for everyone who's listening, can you define this idea of churn?
Sure. Yeah, churn is really the refers to the psychological reaction, I think, of being under identity threat. That is being in a situation where you suspect that you could be devalued there based on something about your identity. People's general feelings about it or negative stereotypes about your identity, and yet the situation is important, and so you're churning to figure out how to adapt to that pressure, to that threat that's in the air. And it is, as you were just mentioning, it is a pretty common experience. And it happens around all kinds of identities, our sex, our race, our ethnicity, our religion in some cases, our sexual
Mhm.
orientation. We're in situations where we know that negative views of our identity, negative stereotypes are relevant to that situation. The situation is kind of important to us, and we don't know for sure whether we're going to be treated that way or devalued. But we better be vigilant to what could happen there. That feeling is churn.
Yeah. And you opened the book with such a, I think, a relatable example, which is a parent teacher conference with a white teacher and a black child, and everyone arriving together and feeling a certain amount of anxiety because, well, for reasons that I think everyone listening understands. Is my child being negatively stereotyped in this situation? The teacher's feeling like, if I say the wrong thing, are they going to think that I'm racist or stereotyped or performing in stereotypical ways? And you just get into this impasse where we don't really have or haven't had the language for naming what's present and addressing it and working through it, right? It's this like this elephant in the room
Yeah,
all the time.
yeah, that was something that I think came from certainly from my research as a framework for looking at my life and other things. But I just had that, I was a university administrator for a good number of years, and I could just see this all the time in important situations that people were reluctant to come together and talk about these kinds of identity-based issues. The whole word identity seems loaded in
Yeah.
American society, and to talk about them seem to stress people on both sides of that kind of conversation. The African American parents, they're worried that their child is going to be seen as maybe not having the same abilities. Maybe the school won't invest in developing those abilities as much, and so the conference is an occasion where they can really try to affect that, try to get the teacher to not see their child in terms of those stereotypes. And it's an important situation. So they're in full churn as they enter the meeting. And the teacher, for her part, is in a similar intense form of identity threat that, she's really dedicated to her students, and she tries to be sensitive to the needs of minority students and the like. And she's But she knows that if she says something even slightly critical of the young man, she could be seen as a racist, which is the stereotype out there in our society that's relevant to her identity in that situation. So here, as you said, there's this sort of impasse. Both parties are experiencing this vigilant churn. How can I manage this situation? Is there really a threat here, or is there not really a threat here? Can I trust the situation? I think of it increasingly as a tension. I talk about it in the book this way too, but as a tension between remembering and forgetting. Both parties do I remember how my group is seen and could be seen in this situation and use that to interpret what's happening to me here? Or do I just forget that and relax? And that tension, I think, makes it clear how difficult it can be and how central it can be to one's sort of emotional state in that kind of a setting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is that kind of a tension. I'd have to have a powerful faith in the other party to not be in churn. I'd have to trust that party. I think that's at base what churn is about is, can I trust the situation? Can I trust that given my identity, I'm going to be okay in this situation? And both parties are worried about that. Um, and the other thing that struck me over the years is that it isn't really about prejudice. We think of bias and prejudice as when we think about these kinds of concerns, that's the framework through which that we bring to bear. That if we could, for example, just eliminate all human prejudice, wouldn't this conversation just be fine?
Yeah.
But you can see that even if you eliminated prejudices in this society at this particular time, uh, that pressure would still be there. Because you would know that you could be seen in terms of those things. You don't know that you are, but you'd know that you could be seen in terms of those stereotypes, and that's what the churn is about. Is about trying to cope with the possibility of that threat in a setting that's important to you.
Yeah. No, and I think that what is essentially just churn is fear, right? And we don't really know how to navigate or hold fear or even identify, like, I'm really scared here. I'm scared I'm going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. I'm scared that, I won't be safe with this person. It goes in all directions, right?
Yeah, you're
And yeah,
you're you're scanning. You're sort of hyper vigilant in
yeah.
both parties are sort of hyper vigilant in the situation.
Yeah. And as you said, like a world without prejudice or stereotypes, like we are invariably like different, right? And our differences are what make such a beautiful and interesting world. So homogeny is not also the goal. And nor is like this idea like, oh, I look at you and I don't see anything about you that distinguishes you from me is also obviously not the goal. That gets into sort of the idea of being colorblind, et cetera.
Mhm.
And yet I feel like in this focus that we've had rightly and wrongly on identity factors, we've just sort of reified all over the place, right? We've polarized all over the place
Yeah,
through this fear and this need to sort. And then it's like, am I a good white person or a bad white person? Am I a good Jew or a bad Jew? Um,
yeah,
and and the way that it is now in everything, right? And we keep culturally adding things to the file. So now it's like, and don't rush to gender anyone, right? So we're like making it into a complete conflagration. I don't know if that's sort of part of the whole point to blow it up and move us into something else. I'm probably more like spiritual woo-woo than you are, but it does feel like we're at this crisis point, and what's happening, as you make the point, where our schools are as segregated as they were in the 60s.
yeah.
And people are, I find this in the Jewish community, it's like, I'm just going to go and be with my people.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's like, let's not do that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
that's a
yes, let's do that and let's not do that.
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
that's a very important a point. I almost neglected there, but churn is something that happens in diverse situations and integrated situations. When we're with our own kind, so to speak,
Yeah.
we feel safe from being seen in terms of negative images of that kind. Uh,
Hmm.
because we're all the same kind. If I'm with African American men in the barber shop, I'm pretty safe. I'm not going to be seen really seriously in terms of negative stereotypes about black people. But as soon as that setting gets diverse, I lose that security. I
Yeah.
know now it could be seen that way. I I'm a bit older, and so when I'm sitting in my Pete's coffee group on Saturday mornings, I'm pretty secure I'm not going to be seen in terms of ageist stereotypes. But as soon as you bring a few young people into that group, uh-oh, they might
Uh-oh.
see me as having, outdated ideas, being technologically incompetent. I mean, there's so many stereotypes about aging out there that
Yeah.
so the churn is a kind of reaction to being in a diverse situation. That's another sort of definition. Part of its definition is that it's a reaction to diversity. And I like you, I've had a hunger for what is really to understand what really is the nature of that tension in diverse settings. And I think it is a matter of sort of trusting our safety. Can we really trust in this situation that we're going to be comfortable? And I can just be free and say what I believe here directly, or will I be subject to some horrible set of circumstances? And I think that is, it's something that happens all over the world, but maybe given the high level of diversity in American society, it's a particularly central feature of life as an American, and it always has been.
Yeah.
Our sort of central conflicts as throughout our history have been around identity and the way it's been used to organize society. Who would be enslaved, whose lands could be appropriated, who could live in this neighborhood, who could live in that neighborhood, who could go to this school, who could go to that school. We've constructed so much of our organization around identity that and then the stereotypes follow
Yeah.
to kind of justify that.
And I think that identity, these are trauma patterns, right? Inherited and experienced real time. And so you get into this hypervigilance, patrolling for the same indicator of that, like that trauma gets stroked and people are off to the races. So we're not coming into it in a relaxed, it's not just a cultural conversation, right? For many
Yeah.
people, this feels existentially threatening for good reason, even though we are not in that period of time anymore. A lot of us are lacking sort of like a resilience or an ability to be like, I'm gonna hold this and move forward anyway, assuming that this person has the best intentions and we're
Yeah.
all working towards some higher good. We've sort of lost that.
Yeah.
It feels more soothing, right? To be confirmed, like I'm right to be freaked out, than it does to sometimes be surprised.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good description of the experience of it. We're kind of vigilant to the possibility of this devaluation based on our
Yeah.
identity. And in situations where the stakes are high, it's an intense feeling. I mean, it can really blanket your
Yeah.
experience and becomes pretty, a day-to-day, moment-to-moment preoccupation in
Yeah.
some circumstances.
And yeah, I don't know if there's research on this, but I feel this sort of when I get with a group of women and they really get going on the patriarchy and whatnot too, that we can be so loyal. We can be so loyal to this idea that the problem is out there and the problem is men, Claude, and then any threat, like anything that threatens that loyalty to this story of it's the men who are the problem and women will save the world can also in a way be seen as disloyal or threatening. I think so there's this idea of like we want to keep some of these stories going. We're not
Yes.
quite ready to let them go.
Yeah.
And
It can be a
yeah,
very adaptive thing to do. Women get
yeah,
together. As an African American, we spend a lot of time talking about race,
yeah, I'm
and
sure.
for the same reasons. I mean, you're kind of trying to figure out, well, what is my vulnerability in this world or in the situation, the stakes can, as I say, the stakes can be very high, and so this churn affects very important things. Right in the immediate situation where you're experiencing it, it can interfere with your functioning. So if, a lot of my research in the past has been to show that it can interfere with things like standardized test performance or athletic performance or the ability to build friendships in a situation. It sort of stiffens us up, and this preoccupation interferes with our ability to perform in the immediate situation or function
Yeah.
in the immediate situation. But it also affects these big choices in our lives, like, what's going to be my college major? Well, I feel comfortable in that major,
Hmm.
but those seems to be dominated by identities different than mine. What career path do I want to spend my life on? What neighborhood do I want to live in? Who can I expect to be close friends with? All these things get affected by this churn,
Yeah.
this kind of reaction to the possibility of threat.
Yeah. And
Right.
so,
We're talking in a dark way. I want to point out for the audience, we're going to get to some
yeah,
optimistic.
yeah, I was just going to turn us. I was going to say, okay, I feel like everyone knows what we're talking about and sort of why we might be feeling this way. But the book it offers antidotes, right? And the core thesis here is that we have to learn to relax and to trust, enable trust in some way, build trust in some way. Um, and you offer many interventions. So maybe we talk about school, right? Because much of the book is about, well, it's also about college education, but how you, for kids who might be coming into a loaded situation where there's negative stereotypes, how you can foster trust out of the gate. And the outcomes are dramatic. Like, this isn't just like nice, touchy feely, let's be friends.
Yeah.
This can determine the course of a life.
Yeah, whether I would feel comfortable stepping on a path, say an educational path that would lead me to be an elite physicist or elite lawyer, or whether I feel comfortable doing that can be affected by this churn we're talking about how secure I'm going to feel if I step on that path, that my abilities and will be recognized and appreciated, and my successes will be credited to me and not seen as exceptions to the rule, and you
Yeah.
know all those things are part of a person's judgment. I see this in university life and student life all the time. What am I going to major in? And I remember talking to a freshman, a white American, and she was really good in math, got into Stanford, and but as she went to the math classes and the computer science courses, she didn't see many other girls like her, and
Yeah.
she just, well, maybe this is not for me. Will I be comfortable in a room in a major that's dominated by people of other identities? A lot of Asian students, a lot of Indian are taking those courses, and so you would think, given her interest and her competence, this would have been the first choice, which it probably would have been. But in that situation, she worried about whether, how she'd be evaluated, and how her frustrations would be evaluated in a class populated in the way it was by identities different than hers. And so she kind of floundered around looking for what to do. I think that's a good example. Where should I live? What part of the Bay Area should I buy property in? Where am I
Yeah.
going to feel comfortable over time, and will I be the only one, or will I? So it is something that affects these things, but I suppose the hope comes in that I'd like to think the book points us to another a road toward remedy, which is to recognize that when we have this feeling, the real focus of remediation should be on building trust. and that is the important currency, as opposed to worrying that it's always or always a reflection of my prejudices and biases and the like. Now, I don't want to put those down, and I'm not here to make an argument against the importance of those things by any means. They're incredibly important, and my field of social psychology has done a lot to document that. But I think this is something else. This is something in addition to that that we just haven't surfaced as much as we should, but that offers us a new path forward for how to manage diverse situations, which we are as a society, and we're getting increasingly diverse. It's an
Yes.
increasingly important dimension of our lives. And so I'm hoping this will give people a different way to think about it, and maybe a more hopeful way. It's easier to build trust and to recognize that trust is the real currency, a real currency in our lives. It's easier to do that than it is to eliminate prejudices from the human character. That's really, as a psychologist, I can attest, that's very hard to do. We can manage prejudices. We've made a lot of progress in understanding how to do that. But in important situations, classrooms, workplaces, traffic stops, it's difficult to eliminate this human, um, I don't know what word to describe it, but it's just difficult to eliminate the play of prejudice in those
Yeah.
situations, except through building trust. When I trust people, when I've got that built, um, prejudice interestingly becomes kind of irrelevant. I stop worrying. I stop worrying so much. I don't have to remember all the time. I can forget. And
Yeah.
I think in our lives, we often have relationships across identity divides that illustrate that to us, that we've already done it, that and maybe at an intuitive level, we understand how to build a connection to other people that gives us a sense of security with them, that they won't judge us negatively in terms of our identities and the like, and that is the focus for how to live in a diverse society and to manage the diverse settings of our lives, the public settings, as school classrooms, and as I say, workplaces and the like. A real focus should be, as a teacher, trying to enable students to learn in that situation and to drop some of their churn. A real focus can be just building a real sense of trust that they're going to be accepted there for who they are, that they're identity won't lead to their devaluation in that setting, that they're secure despite the diversity of the situation. That I think is an easier thing to do than to focus directly, as we sometimes do, on trying to eliminate people's prejudices. I've gone on a long time here, so
No, no. I mean, I think that, yeah, the systemic issues that we have that are now only increasing as our rights are being rescinded and important legislation is being struck down. So again, this
yeah,
not to say that these aren't four alarm fires across the culture. I think most people would agree that these are four alarm fires. Everyone hates gerrymandering, including Republicans or those who might feel like they're benefiting in this election. So, for as one example, as we
yeah,
watch the Voting Rights Act get deconstructed. So
yeah,
that's nothing in this conversation is to suggest that we don't need to shoulder be continually working on systemic change. I think the promise of your book and the real antidotes and solutions, every teacher should read this book for sure, because there are so many simple interventions. But this idea of just trust, like how can I, of all things, I don't need to worry. I'm not going to patrol. I just need to build trust. And ideally, the person with the most power in the situation leads the effort, although I'm sure it's not always that way. But I then, as individuals, we can start to get better outcomes, right? For ourselves and those we love and for students. And shift it that way, versus this like I think sometimes we get in these like nobody again, loyalty to like the systemic issue being the thing that has to be resolved before anyone can do better, right?
Yes.
Um, and
Yeah.
so in the interim, it's like, well, how do you do this? And you offer, I'm looking for it now, but there's a really powerful section about Obama, right? Who's similar to you, white mother, black father, who seemed to just have trust, right? Like that was a tent pole of his entire personality, candidacy, and presidency. Can you talk a bit about that? I thought that was so moving. I think it was Tanisha Coates who was writing about him not knowing any other way.
Yes, yeah, I thought it was a really interesting thing too. People wonder that there's a sort of a fundamental how did this guy Hussein Obama get elected to be the president of the United States?
And
And
how is
no
he so
African
loved,
American, yeah,
right? Yeah.
right, yeah, no African American would have ever predicted that.
No.
And
No.
the best account or the most interesting discussion of that was in Ta-Nehisi Coates's interview with him, and he Coates comes to the view that that Obama won the trust of American people in big part because he gave trust to the American people. That
Yeah.
given his upbringing in an interracial family and in the state of Hawaii, that's much less racially stratified than maybe the rest of the country is, that and even quotes from Obama himself that he just didn't feel like he was going to be that discriminated against based on his identity. He didn't feel the need to churn very much in the way in which he was raised and the circumstances in which he was raised. And so he could bring that trust into the larger society in his campaign for the presidency. That he could go to white homes and put his feet on the kitchen. Well, probably not on the kitchen table, but he could relax in their company and say, "Look, I hear you. I
Yeah.
understand. I hear you. I trust you. I trust you." He really did trust him. And as Coach points out that for most of us African Americans who've been raised in other circumstances, I was raised in Chicago, we're not that prepared to just trust without some clear evidence that that's a sane thing to do. And so Obama could say to the American public something that you have to say in order to be elected president, but that most African Americans wouldn't be able to say, which is that I trust you. I hear what you're concerned about. I understand what you're concerned about. I know you. I am part of you. And that kind of relax enables white voters not to see him first in terms of his racial identity and his middle name, or both his first and middle name, as some foreign person that really would be hard to trust. So out of his very being, his character, his upbringing, his composition, I suppose, as a person, is able to offer something to American people that you really have to offer in order for them to relax and to be able to return that trust. So that's his theory. That's the Coates theory, and I found it sort of a very interesting illustration of what I was trying to say in the book. That to just point to how important that currency is in our relations with each other. That if I can trust you and offer that to you, that I see your full humanity, and I try to in the book talk about how to build trust at the individual level between individuals, and how do you do it in larger settings like classrooms or workplaces, and then how do you do it in entire institutions. But at the individual level, it is you have to. The goal is to be able to see full humanity and potential in difference, in a
Yeah.
different identity. It's easy to see it in our own kind again, but it's harder to see it across identity device. It's so easy to sort of go down the path of dehumanizing language. I think that's one of the real costs of our current administration is making those doesn't bother to dog whistle. He just out and out,
Yeah.
dehumanizes people. And I think that dehumanization is very costly because it creates a world in which it's difficult to trust each other, that we know that other people could easily dehumanize us in the important settings of our lives. And that's part of what goes on in this society. So I think the that is a difficult thing to live with in this society, but it illustrates the point here that at base, our ability to get along with each other and function as an effective, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-classed identity, a society is this currency of trust that has to be preserved and has to be a goal for us to succeed as the kind of society that we are.
Yeah. No, I think, and maybe it's becoming so incredibly polarized by this administration. Maybe there will ultimately, it's hard to fathom this, be a gift in the sense of putting it into such extremes that it is not, so intolerable, so unsurvivable that people really have to push past it, that enough people feel this like extreme anxiety. Because I think that
Yes.
now you feel it
I
so
know where
much.
you're going here. I'm
Yeah.
going right with you.
Yeah. That it becomes, and I see this, my mother in law who has a house in Florida was here, and you can just sense her extreme anxiety about being a Floridian right now, being an older white woman and the way that she looks, and just like feeling like she needs to go around the world everywhere she goes and be like, I didn't vote for him. Like I didn't, just the extreme anxiety, which
Yeah.
I completely understand. But when you look out sort of on the crowds of people who support Trump and the way that it's, I think in so many of our minds being cemented with white supremacy, understandably, you start to then really see the like, this is not me, this is not me, and these people are going to kill me. And I have to hope that it's going to push us into this pragmatic forced trust state, even though that seems crazy.
Yeah.
But
That's
yeah,
that I think that really is, I think, an important hope is that okay, we're seeing how the costs of the unraveling of trust and how
yes,
our leadership can unravel it and how much anxiety that puts in everybody's life.
yeah,
Uh, the stress of being an American has just, escalated amazingly here
yeah,
in these years and of this administration. So I agree with you that maybe this, because I'm trying to be an optimistic person,
I
that
try to be too.
yeah, that maybe this bath in mistrust and vigilance and churn will get us to recognize that how important it is, how important trust in a multi identity society is. That this is
Yeah,
something we have to cherish and learn how to build it, and learn how to maintain it in our own lives and in the actual settings in which we live our lives. One of the sort of I hope it becomes explicit in the book, but one of the implicit aims is to show how much power we can have in the concrete settings of our lives, in our classrooms as teachers and as students, and our workplaces and in our public spaces, that these are places where we can achieve the kind of society we want by understanding that it is trust, that we have to approach them from the standpoint of building trust and sustaining trust in each other. I think one of the costs of maybe the colorblind ethos that we have been under since the 60s, and it's a necessary part of life in many aspects of life. We want our so many opportunities to be colorblind in this society. It's not something we can dismiss, but one of the costs of it is it may make us think, well, we don't have to pay attention to each other's life circumstances, things that are really tied to their identities. And when you start to ignore that, it's hard for people to trust. It's hard for me to trust someone who says they don't see one of the most important aspects of my life.
Yeah.
That I am a woman or that I'm an African American, and I've had to deal with a lot of things because of that. And if a person says, "Well, I'm just going to treat you like you're just like me," well, you're not. Well, I'm not just like you.
Right.
We're both full human beings. I take your good intentions here, but saying that you don't see all the things that I have to deal with is makes it more difficult for me to trust you.
Yeah.
So extending color blindness that far doesn't work well. It kind of undermines the goal that we have.
Yeah.
But but to your larger point, I mean, I don't want to overcomplicate things. I think the main thrust is is to just recognize that trust is such an important ingredient in a diverse society like we have. It has to be recognized. We have to learn how to develop it, and we have to learn how to cherish it. And in that cherishing, I think we it's a way of sort of characterizing how damaging, say, the current administration, the current era can be, by just letting willy-nilly our leadership derogate people and their humanity and charge across the face of the earth with that same attitude.
Yeah.
It's
I yeah. Well, and I think that in this moment, it's a call to I don't know if you've ever encountered Loretta Ross, who's at Smith. She's one of my favorite conversation partners, and she talks about calling in versus calling out. And she talks about like how she can work with 90% of people. There's the 10% who, and this is a woman who was a survivor of extreme sexual assault, who worked with convicted rapists. This is a woman who worked with people coming out of the KKK, rehabilitating them, helping them. So she's been
wow.
there, but her whole point is like, I can work with almost anyone. And that's sort of where we need to be orienting ourselves, is
Yeah,
pragmatism over perfection. And I don't need to be looking at the situation to find every instance where I don't feel like you are taking in the whole thing. Like, I need to get what I need to get out of this situation, which is low churn, right? Because
yeah,
you talked about it a bit, but when we are churning, we do not do well on things like the Stroop test. Like, our functions falter. We do worse on tests. We suffer, right? And in measurable
churn,
ways. Yeah.
churn is very distracting from
Yeah.
the task at hand.
Yeah. And we don't have time for that.
Yeah, it just gums
Um,
up everything.
right. Yeah. Um, I wanted to ask you, you talk about sort of your time going to this tiny college, and was it a semester? I can't imagine that you were
Mm.
a D student or whatever for very long, but you had a roommate, right? Who, like, a high
Mm.
stress situation, and you write about like learning how to study from this kid. Um, and can you talk a bit about that? Because I'm like, this was high churn for you, right? Like, you were like, where am I
Yeah.
and what is happening?
Yeah, that's it. I'm glad you brought that up because it's
Yeah.
to me it's one of the more less talked about and but more interesting aspects of this set of issues. And that when you come into an institution, you're going to you're starting high school, you're starting college, you're starting your new job. There's a lot of ambiguity in the air,
Yeah.
and ambiguity as to how do I respond here? What do I say here? What's valued here? What are these people? How do I succeed? There's a lot of churn going on, and one of the features of our institutions that I think where we can exercise control over it and build trust at that level is to reduce the ambiguity of these situations. ambiguity when in important situations like going to college. I'll use my own example. How do you respond here? How much do you study on this? Just didn't know these things. I know it's
Yeah.
hard to believe that in some ways, but I just didn't know these things. And so not knowing them and yet knowing that I really wanted to survive in college, I knew that that was important. But not knowing how to do it and not knowing what was important, I was in this kind of high churn. Uh, and you in churn, you're worried also about whether or not your identity is a factor in this. You know, am I being, is it because I'm black that I'm being seen this way? Would that essay have been responded to the same way if I was white? Or you don't know. And
Hmm.
so it's hard for you to trust anything. So here's something pretty innocent, ambiguity, confusion. No, it's normal as you go from into a new situation that's important to your on your life path. It's normal to face that, but the ambiguity itself can amplify churn. It can make it this just intense thing as it was for me in that circumstances. And what helped was, and this is where the hope comes back in, it was really pretty simple. I just happened to have this roommate. I don't even know if he ever realized what he meant to me, or that I realized at the time what he meant to me. But he was a good student, and I could just see what he did. I could just copy him. I just decided to do that. You know, okay, this guy gets A's. I'm way away from that. So I'm just going to do everything he does. I'm going to go to class. I'm going to read the book before I go to class. I'm going to, take a few minutes, a half an hour after class to rewrite my notes and try to understand the material. He taught me how to read textbooks and read books for class. You don't try to go so slow and underline everything. To read pretty quickly to get the outline, and then maybe quickly again to firm it up, and then pretty soon the facts in the chapter start to attach to an outline you have, and you got it. You kind of know what that whole thing is about, and it just made uh, going to college a lot easier. It cleared up the ambiguity about how to respond to this situation, and I just felt psychologically freed up and able now to take college in a serious way that before that I wasn't able to do. I was in such churn. It was difficult to really identify with the whole thing, you know. I
Yeah.
I I'd come to college, I was in my own mind, I was a swimmer. I was an athlete as a product of YMCA swimming. And I thought that's what it was all about. And he showed me what to do. That reduced my churn, and I could then really identify with academic life and what it could offer me and the career paths that were available to me. And life got exciting. So here was something that would be quite ordinary, day-to-day, concrete help in a situation that just transformed my whole experience and really my whole life
Yeah.
and put me on a different path. So that's where where I think this argument gets hopeful.
Yeah.
Is that it building trust and helping people deal with what is right in front of them bridges identity divides. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, I didn't worry as much about being discriminated against. I
Yeah.
just, and it wasn't as relevant anymore. And nobody had to change the world around me. It just gave me a different framework for seeing my experience and interpreting it, and
Yeah.
made all the difference.
Well, and you write, I mean, there's some beautiful case studies about Georgia, about, I think it was Berkeley. But this idea in any institution, and it can be work, where you even just saying to someone, when you're tutoring someone, hey, you have a tremendous amount of potential. You can absolutely do this.
Yeah.
My son has some learning issues, and we're lucky, he suffers for nothing. And, he has a tutor who is just like, you're so smart. Like, we're just going to functionally get you going. And that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years, this bridge, so he can live up to his potential. And it's happening. He's doing it. He's running. But I can completely understand just in my own house how he gets demoralized, he gets frustrated, he feels like a failure, he should be able to do this. And
Mm.
without any intervention, you can see how much talent, right, just is like leeching off of our society. And
Yeah.
so there's schools, and we operate, and it's all from this sort of patriarchal white man privilege perspective, like sink or swim, meritocracy,
Yeah.
throw
Yeah.
everyone in the deep end and figure it out. And that's just not appropriate. Not really
No.
for probably anyone, but definitely not for anyone coming in who isn't that, where
Yeah, I
there's
think.
extra weights on their ankles, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's something we've been naive about, that kind of model, that pedagogy of, sink or swim, look to your left, look to your right, who's going to be here at the end of the quarter or the end of the year. That approach, that kind of hard-nosed, demanding, high accountability approach, might work in a more homogeneous situation where everybody had the same identity and they weren't worried so much about being seen in terms of negative images of that identity and that what they weren't in churn, that
Yeah.
might work. But in a diverse situation where a good portion of people are going to be in churn, and our society is increasingly diverse. Those classrooms are increasingly diverse. 52% of our public school K through 12 schools, 52% of the students there are low income or poor.
Yeah.
Um, so there's this kind of diversity right there that needs to be understood. So, when that is the case, then I think education can take a huge step forward by understanding that with students, you need to build that trust that you may have been able to take for granted in a more homogeneous situation, more homogeneous classroom or school. Why would they mistrust you? Well, they wouldn't. They kind of trust you. You had the benefit of that. But in a diverse situation, this sense of safety and being able to trust it needs to be directly built. And I thought the excitement I have about it is that it can be built. And I think a lot of us have even good intuitions about how to do that. We just need to know that that's what we should do there. I have a long chapter in the book about these low income kids going to school. They're really pretty destitute. I got to know this family a
Hmm.
bit. The kid is in grade school, and on the way to school, he's looking at garbage cans for food.
Yeah.
And he gets to school, and the school sees him as well, let's give him a test because we got to teach him to read. That's the thing, and that's incredibly well intended. But just think about it. He hasn't had any preparation for that. He hasn't had a life that really gave him the preparation to be able to do well on that test. So he doesn't do well on the test. He gets assigned to the low reading group. He gets then from then on he's seen a certain way in that school, and it's permanent. The school isn't really prepared to help him overcome that in a big way, and so he kind of just disidentifies with school. So there's a casualty. He's plenty smart. That's not that's it's the school sees it all as a matter of cognitive abilities, like children are just brains on sticks. That's an
Yeah,
old
totally.
call it, and they're not responding in any other way than that. But the real simple thing is that he needs to, if the teacher began the day by reading a really fun and interesting story for 45 minutes to the whole class that would engross that kid, he'd begin to see what a world is available to him and what the school really could offer. It would be a different approach, and if the teacher was kind and supportive and encouraged the development of his abilities rather than classified him as to his abilities right away,
Yeah.
and then locked him into that sort of on an indefinite basis, he might really become something you'd never expect.
Yeah.
The amazing abilities would flower. And I suppose my own experiences with that give me some sense of that. That I've been that kid, and I know what the transition out of that looks like and what it took to make that happen. And it took some kind people that really empathized with me and could see what I was dealing with.
Yeah.
They didn't just, relate to, well, I think this kid needs to know how to read. Oh, of course he needs to know how to read, but how do you get him there?
Yeah.
You You've got so anyway. Again, I don't want to ramble here, but I just want to illustrate both what the barrier is, the threat, the churn, and how manageable it can be, and how transformative it can be to both parties,
Yeah.
students and the teachers.
Yeah. And you use this adjective. I can't believe it hasn't come up. It's my favorite word. But throughout, it's like, how do we just become more wise? And, as people who have more power than other people, how can you be wise? How can you be open eyed, empathic, and oriented towards the future potential and this idea, and it comes up throughout the book, of even just like, what are your values, extracting values, orienting kids around that, or adults. Hey, I hired you for this job because I think you're the only one who can do it, right? I think you're extremely talented. So here are your KPIs. Here are my expectations. Here's what success looks like. Here's what we don't know. I want you to be able to fail and feel safe. Like, whatever it is that we can do with people in our lives to reduce that churn, be more wise,
Yeah,
is
I
energy
love
well
the
spent. Yeah.
yeah, I love the story from Irving Goffman, famous sociologist. He came to that term through an ethnography he did of gay life in San Francisco in the 50s. And you see people living under incredible stigma. And they had a term for straight people who they trusted, who they knew saw through the stigma and knew that they were fully human. And they called those people wise. And African Americans have a ton of terms for that man. He's cool, man. He's cool. She's down. She gets it. She sees that we're really human,
Yeah.
and she doesn't see us through those stereotypes. So I love the term for that reason, because it has all that excess good meaning to it attached to it as well.
Yeah.
That about wisdom and the like. But I think it's something, and there are examples. I think one of my favorite pieces of research in the book is these expert tutors who were able to get kids who were really terrible at math, and that was their reputation throughout the school. And these tutors yet could get them to be really good math students. And they did it by being wise, by not evaluating them, but very straightforwardly in sort of Socratic questioning. Do you sure you want to have do you sure you want to borrow from that number to subtract from this number, and just asking questions, asking, and so that the student could begin to see that they did know some things, and that they were learning other things. The tutor was expert at sort of making that a prominent part of the experience of learning math, and these kids flourished. Kids who were graded by the schools as terrible at it.
Yeah.
And I think all of us can kind of look at our lives and see, maybe too few, but can see examples of abilities being pulled out of us like that, or enabled to be to come out of us like that. Where we're not sort of seen as, well, you're in the Bluebird reading group, and that's that. That's because that's your ability. We have this ability uh, thing, this cognitive ability thing, that I think is that's probably for a topic for another book. but, but we overuse it
Yeah.
especially the academic world. We way overuse this.
Yeah.
I have
It's a
a good friend
very
who's a Nobel
verbal.
Prize. I have
Yeah.
a friend who's a Nobel Prize winning physicist, and he grew up in a very, very rural area, and he got interested in physics because his first job was to take care of the equipment in a physics lab at a nearby university, and he could hands-on kind of see what they were doing.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And he got interested in what they were doing. And then the
Yeah.
book and all that stuff, they just come online pretty straightforwardly.
Yeah.
Uh, so. Anyway.
No, I mean, there's like 10, 12 different types of intelligences, and we really only orient all of our schooling towards one, sort of the cognitive, typically verbal, not
Yes.
even spatial
Yeah.
intelligence. And a lot, we're missing it in terms of a lot of talent that doesn't see the world that way. If our world were oriented towards spatial learners, I would be toast, you know. I still can't park, Claude. But I am very verbal, so it's benefited me. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
another
speaking
book.
of that example, I think of my father. My father was African American, born in 1900, and he had no education, and it's maybe third grade at most in those days. In those days, his there was even he didn't have a birth certificate. It wasn't even recorded, so he had utterly no education. But he was the intellectual in our family, and he had an ability to see nuance in other people that was just astonishing
Yeah,
and inspiring. He's a truck driver, and he knew every alleyway in Chicago and where how the wind blew, and he maintained his employment because he could get things done so effectively. But he had no academic background. I remember he wrote me a letter in college, and it was pretty clear. I think maybe he read, a book or two in his whole life. Uh,
yeah,
so, so if you gave him a test, this brilliant man, this deeply human person would just look retarded.
yeah,
And so that's always just been a vivid example to me in thinking about our educational infrastructure and how much it puts on these tests that may be valid for some section of our population, but not for a whole lot of it. It's missing these other kinds of talents. Do you think Miles Davis would have really scored really well on a GRE for me to get into graduate school in music?
right. No, I mean 100%, right?
Yeah,
So you just think about the talent that we desperately need that hasn't been seen or explored. I mean, I loved this book, and it's like amazing. It's packed, and it's only 170 pages or something. Nice job. I mean, I wish I had that talent. I don't know how to stop.
well, I tried really hard to, because people don't like to read long books.
No, they don't. I
Many,
can.
some do,
Yeah,
but maybe not many. And so I wanted to make it as you could pick this up and read it.
yeah. You can read it on a Sunday.
Uh, Yeah.
So thank you for your work. And yeah, I can't wait for your next book.
Is that a pressured?
That's a pressure and expectation.
No, me too. I'm busy thinking about that.
Excellent. All right. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for your time.
Yep. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Really
Okay.
appreciate the time. Thank you.
Of course. Bye.
Bye bye.
I wanted to tell you a bit about one of the a research study that Claude Steele did with Jeff Cohen and Lee Ross. This was done at Stanford, and the simple question was, how can a white professor give critical feedback to a black student and have that feedback be trusted? And they ran this experiment, and it was what they expected and also always unsettling. So there was always a white feedback giver. And when they would give the feedback, either straightforwardly or with a compliment preceding it, black students trusted it less than white students. So this gets at this churn that we were talking about. So he writes, this finding shows something profound, how stereotypes about an identity that are merely in the air can unsettle trust that is critical for learning or for benefiting from feedback more generally. This isn't a passing predicament. It's something that our black participants will regularly deal with in diverse schools and workplaces throughout their lives. The attributional ambiguity, as my colleagues Jennifer Crocker and Brenda Major have called it, of not knowing whether critical feedback is warranted or coming from negative stereotypes that are in the air. It was an expected finding. It fit the reasoning my colleagues and I were developing, but it was nonetheless unsettling to see something so in the air, so abstract and unspoken, undermine a critical kind of trust that should be commonplace. Okay, this is where it gets hopeful. He writes, on a more hopeful note, the experiment also found a wise way to give critical feedback. In a third condition, the feedback giver said to each participant that he was using high standards in evaluating their work and that, having looked at their essay, he believed that they had the potential to meet those standards. This signaled to the Black participants that they weren't being stereotyped. If they were, they wouldn't be held to high standards or have their potential affirmed. This feedback was water on parched land for Black participants. They trusted it as much as white students did. And trusting it, they used it to improve their essays. 3 times more of them took their essays home to improve than to participants in any other condition of the experiment. So that's helpful. All right, friends, thanks for listening. I will see you next time.